Hello, and welcome to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. I feel so privileged you are taking time out of your busy life to learn all about the ways to interpret neurodivergence for you and your child. Remember, all advice on this podcast is general and may not specifically apply to your child, so we encourage you to also talk to your GP, paediatrician or specialist to see if what you've learned will help your family. Welcome to all our parents and carers. This is You Can Grow Your Own Way. You may have noticed a slight gap in episode releases, and I am sharing the realness. We've been moving house and moving town, and doing that with 3 neurodivergent children has been quite the interesting challenge. A lot of emotional upheaval, a lot of triggered children, which leads to triggered parents. And I've had to spend some time focusing solely on our little people over the last few weeks. So I do apologize for the delay, but hey, that's life, hey? We are coming to you today to talk about QEEGs, which is looking at brain scans for quantitative and qualitative information. And we're going to be talking today with Daniel Lane. Daniel Lane is the clinic director of the Perth Brain Centre. He has over 30 years of experience in private practice with a special interest in the treatment of brain-based disorders through the activation of neuroplasticity, a term that we have discussed before, but we'll discuss in this episode as well. Daniel has completed extensive study within the field of neurological rehabilitation and has training in a number of fields, including neurofeedback therapy, quantitative electroencephalogram brain mapping. That's a mouthful. He's board certified by the International QEEG Certification Board, and in non-invasive brain stimulation, completing certification at the Berenson Allen Centre for Non-Invasive Brain Stimulation at Harvard Medical School. So Daniel actually moved here from Oxford in the United Kingdom to Perth with his family in 2007. And upon moving to Perth, in addition to private practice, Daniel worked for the Murdoch Institute as a clinical supervisor and also later headed the clinical outreach program at the School of Chiropractic and Sports Science. He also has a range of mentoring and other public speaking under his belt. So we are incredibly lucky to have him sharing his extensive knowledge with us today. A little note to those of us who are listening via the podcast. We will be discussing brain scan images and they will be shown on the YouTube. So you've got 2 options here to get the greatest out of this episode. One is to pause here if you're listening audially and to switch over to our YouTube channel, which you can find on YouTube at You Can Grow Your Own Way, and you'll be able to see the visuals. The other is to jump onto our socials. So on Facebook and Instagram, You Can Grow Your Own Way, and we'll have a link there. We will also have a link on our podcast website, which is youcangrowyourownway.podbean.com, where you will be able to follow along if you wish to listen to this via audio. You'll be able to have a look at those images. So they certainly help colour in the conversation. If you're in a position where you want to listen to it now and maybe look at the images later, completely understand, but you will get a lot more depth out of this conversation if you do have a chance to see what brain mapping actually looks like. So with that little note, let's get chatting to Daniel. So, Daniel, we're here to talk about brains today, and we're here to talk about what brains can look like. Do you want to talk us through at the start what a QEEG actually is?
Yes. Look, so QEEG stands for quantitative EEG, sometimes also known as a reference EEG. So some of your viewers and listeners might be familiar with EEG. Okay, EEG stands for electroencephalogram, which is a test that's been around since about the 1920s, where you were recording brainwave activity. It's called an EEG. Okay, the first brainwaves first detected were alpha brainwaves, for example. We'll talk about those a little bit later on with some other brainwaves too. Okay, and EEG is probably particularly widely used as a test for looking for seizures and epileptic activity. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, you're not going to see an awful lot of stuff on a regular EEG. Quantitative EEG is like a more detailed version of EEG. It's been around since about the 1950s and 60s, originally developed by NASA as a way to more accurately measure their astronauts' brain activity, the effects of space travel. Um, with quantitative EEG or reference EEG, you do a similar baseline EEG recording, although the recording conditions are a little bit different. Okay, typically done at rest, um, eyes open, eyes closed, often. And then after the recording the raw data, you then do a quantitative analysis where you take that raw data, compare that to reference norms of neurotypical databases that are all sort of internationally validated. And what comes back are sort of two-dimensional, three-dimensional images that look at brain function. Okay, so it doesn't look at brain structure. If you want to look at brain structure, you've got to look at things like MRI and
Mm.
CT scans. Quantitative or reference EEG is a brain function test. And we'll typically see, for example, we'll do a few examples a bit later on, evidence of underactivity or overactivity and some other things too in different parts of the brain. And you can use the information from QEEG to understand why somebody has difficulties with, for example, attention or executive function or social skills and communication or learning. So you can see that quite clearly. It gets a lot of show and tell with my patients. And then you can use that same data then to help target therapy and advice to help sort of retrain or rewire those areas to work much better. And you can do that in very specific ways. Because the advantage of EEG and QEG is you can see what's going on and target your intervention. You're not looking at sort of symptoms. We're looking at underlying brain function and what underpins those symptoms.
Fantastic. Now, so I think one of the reasons I was really excited to have this conversation, firstly, as listeners will know, everything to do with the brain and how incredible the brain is really excites me. I think in another life, I should have gone into some neuro field, but here we are, mum instead. Um, and the other thing I think I find really fascinating is that there's so many subjective conversations around neurodivergence, what its
Mm.
strengths and its weaknesses are. A lot of people like to weigh in around its validity, its overdiagnosis, but I think the really amazing thing about something like a QEEG is that it's something that people can use that is visible, it's concrete, it's science, and I think that that in this space is a really powerful tool for parents and neurodivergent people to have.
Look, people find the results of quantitative imaging really validating. All these things are basically invisible, aren't they, until you
Mm,
actually look.
mm,
Okay?
mhm,
It's worth pointing out, Carly, to your listeners and viewers that you can't use brain imaging to diagnose people with X
mm,
or Y or Z because there's a clinical diagnosis based on symptoms. Symptoms are transdiagnostic, to use some of the official kind of language. So you could have, five people with a diagnosis of ADHD, five people with a diagnosis of autism, and some of their symptoms will overlap. So there's
mm.
never one pattern you see in imaging with everybody with a diagnosis of ADHD or everybody with a diagnosis of autism, okay, because everything's on the spectrum. Okay.
That's it,
Um,
yes.
but there are very common patterns you see in people who always have the same sorts of things going on. And we'll talk about those things a little bit later on. So those things might be a tendency to hyperfocus and get stuck on things, or might be difficulty reading nonverbal social cues, or whatever
Mm.
it is. So those are common patterns that are easily recognizable on imaging.
And for parents and carers who are listening, I think the really fabulous thing is this is probably the closest thing, and I'm not putting the pressure on, but it's the closest thing they're going to get to a little bit of a almost like an instruction manual to start to understand the activity of their child's brain because they can't see it and they're often interpreting things from the outside. Which can be, once again, very subjective, very complicated. So to have a visual representation that can show here is where they struggle. We see in this, this is more difficult for them. It's definitely easier when a parent feels like they want to, unpack a reaction and see where its source was and how they could have helped.
Yeah, look, we see a lot of people who have they're very detailed, fairly expensive reports done, okay, that will go into details, comment, and make reference to things like difficulties with processing speed or working memory, all this kind of stuff. But those are not telling you why that is happening. Okay, they
Mm,
just tell you that yes, you have difficulty with processing. Okay,
mm,
somebody might have apparent slow processing because maybe their brain's running slowly, okay, or they might have apparent slow processing because in fact their brain's running really fast and its things are busy on the inside. There's not much
Mm.
space for anything at the front end, okay, and those things look really very different in imaging, okay, although the symptoms of the front end can look really very similar. And so those reports, and I've seen lots of them, that they could be useful for some things, but they don't still give you any answers to why those things are happening.
Mm. So as I said, obsessed with the brain. I think it's a good thing to be obsessed with. So as we know, the brain is always changing. It's refreshing, it's evolving, it's pruning, it's growing. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the wonders of the brain?
So we're talking about plasticity here, aren't we?
I think
Okay.
we are,
Yeah.
yeah.
But although it's a word that I find difficult to pronounce, Carly, that's that's the problem. So it was really sort of plasticity that kind of got me sucked into this kind of field in the late 90s. My background originally was working as a chiropractor in the sort of early mid 90s. And then I sort of got interested in plasticity really overnight, okay, and started doing an awful lot of sort of courses and learning, and predominantly in Europe and the US. Moved here to Perth in 2007 and set up Perth Brain Centre then. That was 2007 was the year that Norman Doidge, okay, published his first book, The Brain That Changes Itself,
Mm,
okay,
mm,
um, which is this one here.
beautiful.
Okay,
Now, for
that's
listeners, as I've mentioned earlier, we are going to have copies of these images that you'll also be able to see in show notes and on our social media.
really cool. So, for those people that are sort of interested in neuroplasticity, which is this ability of the brain to change its own sort of function and how it works, I'd certainly recommend The Brain That Changed Itself by Norman Doidge. His subsequent book, The Brain's Way of Healing. This is a different text by a chap called Michael Mercenich that I also recommend as well. Um, so plasticity, Carly, is this ability of the brain to change its own function, how it works, as a result of things going on around us and how we respond to those things. Okay, so if we were to understand that I might have difficulty reading nonverbal social cues because I have a problem in my brain that makes it difficult to do that. Okay, every therapist out there is trying to improve how that part of the brain works, okay, to get results. That's what everybody's trying to do, whether that's with a talk therapy or a behavioral skill based therapy, whatever it is. Everyone's trying to change brain function. That's
Mm,
plasticity. So no particular professional discipline has got the ownership on plasticity because everyone's in the same game. Okay. Um, the trick with plasticity, the trick with changing how the brain works, is to get the right bits to change in the right way. That's
mm,
the important bit, isn't it?
mm,
Okay.
mm,
And the advantage of imaging is you can see which parts of the brain aren't working as best as they could be, and then you can target your intervention to target those particular bits. It takes all the guesswork out. It's very simple. Okay, yeah? Yeah, and we think of plasticity as this wonderful thing. It kind of is, but it's a double-edged sword. So, your brain has a capacity to change in helpful ways, like
mm.
to improve your social skills or improve your emotional regulation, or to change in unhelpful ways, maybe to develop chronic pain or something else, for example. So it's this
My
ability to
brain, while you were talking about that, was thinking about PTSD. So
there we go.
PTSD, we've got that broad highway, and then we actually want to shrink that and, take that pathway away as we get older.
Yeah, and look, those brain changes you see with PTSD at the time of the event are potentially helpful for your survival to get you through that. But years later, those same patterns of behavior in your brain are no longer serving you.
Mm.
Okay, and leave
Wow.
people pretty stuck and shut down. Okay, so plasticity, it's just kind of inherently what the brain does: good, bad, and neutral. Yeah,
Mm. Beautiful. And so while we're talking about neuroplasticity, I can see this beautiful note you've put here about the brain as networks and hubs.
I love
Do you want to
this. So this,
elaborate for
this
us?
is this. We're going to get a bit nerdy now.
Oh, the brain talk should always be a bit nerdy. That's how we learn.
So let's talk about kind of how the brain works and networks, all this kind of cool stuff. So, um, so you don't have one part of the brain doing one thing all the time. You have different parts of the brain working together to form networks. We'll talk about some of those networks in a minute or two. Okay. Yeah? The contribution to networks is not even. Some areas are really important players. They're called network hubs. And we derived all this language from network theory. Okay, um, so the brain operates in networks. So we have a group of parts of the brain working together to form a network. Okay, and that network might be for attention or for vision or something. Okay, the contribution to networks is not, even though some areas are more important than others, they're called hubs. Okay, and we know where all the hubs are for lots of different networks, so we can see that quite easily. Okay, so that brings us to this rather cool diagram that we've put together here, which looks at probably most of the brain major networks, okay, and where they relate to. So it's a bit reflective. I'll try and get that to focus in a second. And where they relate to in terms of, there we go, in terms of EEG recordings. So this is looking at major brain networks, major functions, and something called the 1020 system. The 1020 system is the international standardized system for recording EEG and QEEG. So it's the same all over the world, can't we? So looking down on the brain from the top, these are frontal recording sites, these are back ones, and there's sort of all these standardized placements. And different networks are associated with different recording sites. Really important. Okay, yep. So we'll talk about some of the sort of key, some of the most common networks that we talk about. I could talk about all of them, but we're here for hours and hours. We'll talk about some of the major networks I talk about most frequently with most of the people we see in clinic that are mostly sort of somewhere in that kind of neurodivergent kind of spectrum. Okay, yeah. So let's talk about a few. Okay, this is the central executive network. So I've just highlighted the main parts of the brain that are associated with the central executive network. Okay, again, it's a little bit reflective. Come on then. Oh, there, okay, bother. Okay, there we go. So areas towards the front of the brain, but also areas towards the back of the brain too. Okay, central executive network predominantly involved with things like, obviously, executive function, planning, organizing, working memory, inhibitory and impulse control. Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, the default mode network. We'll go into some examples of this in a bit more detail in a second.
Beautiful.
The default mode network. This is a really important network. Okay, the default mode network, okay, which is localized in areas towards the front of the brain in the middle, and areas at the back of the brain in the middle, and at the sides. So these areas here and here are part of the default network. The default network is a network in our brain responsible for our default thoughts and internal dialogue and chit chat, including how much that kind of chit chat we've got. It's involved with things like self-referential processing in theory of mind, so kind of how you fit into the world and understand where other people are coming from. All that's really
Mhm.
important for this kind of being. Okay, we see a lot of people that have uh, overactivity in the default network, so they tend to have very busy minds, an awful lot of stuff that's kind of going on. And that can look like inattention in the outside world. That can look like slow processing, but you've just got too many things going on in the background. It's like having too many tabs running. Okay, we see a lot of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Different parts of that network are involved with different functions. Okay, so for example, areas at the back on the right side, around here, are particularly associated also with visuospatial processing and processing non-verbal social cues like facial expression and body posture and tone of voice. We'll come to that, for example, in an example in a minute or two. So it's a default mode network, a really important network. It's
Mm.
sometimes described as a task negative network because it's active when you're not doing anything. Okay, so classically, you'll have networks for attention and executive control over here. You'll have the default network over here. Okay, and then you'll switch between the two. Okay, we'll talk about the switching network in a minute or two. That's called salience. Okay, now, you can imagine if you have, you know, too much activity in the default network and a busy mind, you might have
Mm.
difficulty being present and attentive in the outside world.
Yes.
You might imagine if you have underactivity in these task positive networks for attention executive function, how you could also have issues with attention. You
Mm.
can also see that maybe if you have difficulty switching between the two, you can get stuck here or
Yep.
stuck there as well. Or you can have
Yep.
an interesting combination of all sorts of different things.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, this is the dorsal attention network. Okay, a little bit different to the ventral attention network. The dorsal attention network predominantly localized in areas that are very similar to the central executive network. So areas at the front, but also at the back as well. Okay. the limbic network. This is really important, Carly. Okay,
Mhm,
limbic network is responsible for regulating our thoughts and our emotions and feelings, and
mhm,
how we respond to stress and how important things are to us. So these areas are in the midline, okay, down the middle of the brain, and also in these temporal regions more on the inside than the outside. Okay, um, particularly common patterns are things like underactivity in frontal areas resulting in low drive and low motivation. Okay.
mhm,
Or
mhm,
sometimes the opposite can occur. We see a lot of that where there's very high drive and high motivation. People tend to get really stuck on things, can't let things go. Some things are really, really important, kind
mm.
of stuff. Okay. Yeah. Results in sort of inflexible thinking, sort of black or white kind of stuff. It's OCD, PDA kind of profiles.
I'm hearing so many bits and pieces of my kids while we're talking. It's amazing the little light bulbs that are going off in my head. Yep.
This is the medial temporal network localized to the temporal lobes, but on the inside of the temporal lobe, to the side of your head. Okay, so areas more on here, the medial aspect of the temporal lobes. The medial temporal lobe network is involved with really memory and learning. Okay, typically problems in that network result in, most commonly in practice, some things getting stuck in there too easily and some things very difficult to get in there. People often
Mm,
talk about a bit of a learning block. Very common. Okay. Um, uh, and last but not least, in terms of some of the major networks, we have the salience network. Okay, the salience network is also localized to these sort of midline areas, okay, and these areas at the side here and here. The salience network is involved with things like attentional and cognitive flexibility. Okay, yeah. Um, with people either having it's like the gear stick, gearbox.
mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
so sometimes that gear shifting can be really stiff, and it can be hard to shift your attention. Okay,
Yes.
difficulty um, shifting from one task to another kind of stuff. Okay, getting stuck on things, or sometimes it can be too loose and floppy, and you can't stick to anything at all. Okay, yep, so those are some of the sort of like the top 5 networks that I talk about most of the time. There are
Mhm.
lots of other ones too. Okay, we haven't talked about. Okay, like perhaps language might be an interesting network that we talk about quite a lot. Sensory motor involved with sort of movement control, but those are like the top 5, Carly. Okay,
Sure.
yep.
Yeah.
Um, what I thought we'd do next is sort of run through sort of some examples of QEG imaging using those networks and sort of talk
Mm.
about a typical kind of case and what that kind of presents like.
Yeah,
Okay,
fantastic. We love a case study.
that's cool. The important thing to remember is that these are all really simple examples with just
Mhm,
one network really being
mm,
talked about most of the
mm,
time. Okay,
mm,
or at least, no, I'm going to rephrase that, really with only one major thing going on, which can affect multiple networks. It's really common to see more than one thing going on. Okay, yep. Um, so, brain scans, what do they look like? Just in case you guys haven't seen them, they kind of look like this. That's how you record quantitative EEG. So you have these special claps you can pop on the head. They're little sort of plastic electrodes with some wires coming out the back, connected to an amplifier. It's like a slightly snug feeling kind of swimming cap kind of thing. Um, it typically takes about you know, 20 minutes, between 10 to 20 minutes to get things set up. Okay.
mhm.
During that time, you can wiggle around a little bit. It's not too bad. Okay. And the recording time, typically kind of, 5, 10 minutes or something, or sometimes longer. Okay. Depending on the case.
I
Yeah.
was just about to say, how do you go with the really sensory ones?
Well, we see a lot of wriggly kids, as you can possibly imagine. That's mostly what we see. Okay, yeah. Um, and during the recording, it is important to sit as still as possible.
Mm,
Okay, recognizing that lots of people find it difficult to sit still. Okay, yeah. Um, it's not so important that somebody's sitting there tapping their foot. Okay, it's more important that somebody's not kind of doing all this kind of
scratching their
stuff.
face
Okay.
or yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So we can
Yep.
do our best to distract kids and things like that. We've all sorts of tricks up our sleeve to kind of make it work. Um, very occasionally we will have to repeat a scan. It doesn't happen very often, but occasionally that we will. Okay. If you don't have enough good quality data. Uh,
Mm,
um, And there are things that people can do to prepare for the scan in advance to make the process more likely to be successful. There's lots of stuff on our website about how you can do that. And in fact, washing your hair and, getting comfortable with, caps and your clips and bits and bobs and things. And
Mm,
some of the initial inquiries that we have from people, um, it might be that their child is not yet uh, ready to do a scan. That's
mm,
possible. Okay.
mm,
It might be that they need to go away and practice for a couple of months with hats and caps and wires and bits and bobs, so they're sort of more familiar with the process. People sometimes quite like to kind of come into clinic when there's not much going on, have a bit of poke around behind the scenes and stuff as well. So all that stuff's completely fine. Okay. Yeah. Uh, but so we spend all day every day scanning regular kids, so it's most likely to work out okay. Okay.
yes. Yep.
Um, uh, um, so we'll typically sort of do the recording during the appointment. Patient then goes away. Then in between then and next time, we're doing the analysis. Okay, yeah.
Mm,
Um, where we turn the EEG recording into a quantitative EEG. Okay. Um, so we're measuring brain waves. That's what we're measuring with an EEG. Okay. And we're all producing lots of different speed brain waves all the time, from fast ones to slow ones. We give them
mm,
names. So really slow waves are called delta waves. We would normally have lots of those in deep sleep. Really fast waves like high beta, if you're being chased by tigers, and everything in between. So we're kind of looking at how slow or how fast things are running. And we can measure these in particular frequencies to be quite precise. Okay.
mm,
So um, here's an example of some brain maps. Okay. So this is brain mapping. We'll look at the two-dimensional images first, and then the 3D images, Carly. Okay. So what do we got here? Let's try and get that to focus. Don't know why your camera's not working so well. Okay. So each of these little maps here is using colors. There we go. It's using colors to show us how much of each different speed brainwave people have compared to reference range. These are very slow speeds at the top. Those are those delta waves. You normally have lots of those in deep sleep. Things get
mm,
faster towards the bottom of the page, and then super fast on the second page.
sure.
We are all generating all those different brainwave frequencies all at the same time, all over the place. That's perfectly normal.
Mm,
What's important, though, is to have just the right amount of each one for the right time and the right place for things to work at their best. Yep. We know what that right amount is for resting state. That's why
mm,
QEG has done resting state as a baseline test. Okay.
yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the colors on these maps um, reflect Z scores, standard deviations from reference range,
Mm-hmm.
where white is between 0 to 1 standard deviations top of the bell curve. So that means in the perfect world, all the maps are going to be white everywhere, colleagues, all the levels will be textbook perfect. Okay, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Okay, yeah? If if something is dark blue, we're -4 standard deviations below norms. That's very significantly less than norm outside range. Red is very significantly more and outside range, and then a sliding scale. I
Sure.
always say to people, look, in the real world, things aren't always technically perfect. They're still
Mm,
basically okay. And a common cutoff point for lots of tests is around 1.5 standard deviations.
yes.
So that means in our maps here, if something's a little bit kind of light green or dark green, it's basically okay or could be perfectly okay unless you're being a bit fussy.
Mm,
Okay. So in summary, we're thinking, have we got not enough of or too much of something going on somewhere? Okay.
sure. Yep.
So again, these are all nice sort of simple ones. Okay. Um, So what have we got here? So, there's lots of white. There's a few sort of small bits and bobs here, nothing outside reference range. There's some blue around here, isn't there? Okay, yep. So here we can see, if I zoom in a bit, uh, anywhere from mild
Mm,
to moderate plus decreases in, because this negative end of the scale. So not enough of, particularly, let's say 8 and 9 and 10 hertz brain activity going on somewhere.
okay.
Okay. Yep. Um, let's just pause for a second. So 8, 9, 10 hertz, okay, falls within a frequency range commonly known as alpha. Okay. So the first thing I would have said to these parents is your child's not making enough alpha brainwave activity.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Okay.
Mm,
So we all need alpha brainwaves to feel relaxed and present in the moment.
mm-hmm.
So if you can't generate enough alpha activity, people having the machinery to easily feel relaxed and present, they'll typically feel unrelaxed and not present. we also need alpha waves to attenuate and filter, kind of block out incoming sensory information from the outside world. So
Okay.
as alpha goes down, like in this case, people tend to become more sensitive to, distracted by, or overwhelmed by things all the time. There's
Yes.
generally too much noise to signal going on all the time.
Mhm.
Yep.
Mhm.
So then we want to take that a bit further and go, okay, so where is all this too much noise going on inside this person's brain? Where is this alpha decrease mostly? Because those are flat maps, they don't give us location information. Yep.
Mm.
We get the location information instead from these 3D images called Loretta. And Loretta imaging doesn't tell us how good or bad things are, but points to where things are happening. And we
Okay.
can localize the maximum decrease in this alpha wave activity in this patient towards the back of the brain on both sides and in the middle. So
Okay.
looking down from the top, that's the front and that's the back.
Mhm.
Okay. Here's a side view, that's the back and the front. So this is the middle bit around here, like a 3D kind of slice. Okay. Yeah. Um, so areas in the middle here, known as the medial parietal region and posterior cingulates, parieto temporal regions on both sides. Okay. Uh, Um, uh, um, and what do those parts of the brain do? Okay. So um, I know we're not meant to use all these sort of horrible, acronyms, aren't we? But those areas are particularly involved with the central executive network, the default network, and the dorsal attention network.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's too much noise in that region. So that's,
Mhm.
remember the default network, internal dialogue and chit chat and stuff. That person's got
Mhm.
too much noise going on inside their head.
Mhm.
Okay. Yep.
Mhm.
These areas at the back of the brain, okay, are involved with dealing with incoming sensory information from the outside world. Okay. Areas on the left side, if I make it a bit bigger, areas on the left side here are particularly associated with speech and language and auditory processing, but generally will
Okay.
wide up the whole kind of language network.
Yep.
So that person's going to have difficulties with auditory processing, too much noise. They're going to find it hard to differentiate. Like if we have five other people talking at the same time as
Yes.
me right now, we'd find it difficult to tune into and filter that. Okay, yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Areas at the back on the right side, though. Okay, referred to this a bit earlier today. So right side are associated with visuospatial processing and processing non-verbal social cues like facial expression and body posture and tone of voice. That person's likely to be overwhelmed by the world around them. Okay,
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
visuospatial, and overwhelmed by and have difficulty interpreting non-verbal social cues, again, like facial expression,
Mm.
body posture, and tone of
Mm.
voice.
Okay.
Yep. So there's no kind of quiet place for that person. Okay, I see a lot of this kind of picture.
Mm.
So that person's going to be is going to have a busy, noisy mind on the inside that they can't get
Mhm.
away from, and the whole
Mhm.
world is too busy and too noisy at the same time too. Okay,
Mhm.
they're going to have difficulty understanding what people are saying to them, and difficult understanding what people are meaning, and dealing with the world around them. Okay,
Yes.
sometimes I say to people, it's a bit like if I was plonked into another country, well, I didn't speak the same language, and the whole place looked completely different. I'd find that
Mm.
pretty overwhelming all the time. Okay,
Yeah.
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 Probably the most common pattern that I see in clinic with children with the diagnosis of autism. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does all that
Yep.
make sense?
Yes, very much so.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I was just, if you don't mind, I thought I might do a really quick summary on what I took away from what you've just said. And that might be good for people who are listening to kind of join a couple of the little dots as well. So, from what I heard you say, is you use the speed of the brain waves and the energy waves to identify where something is above or below normal. And then you use an image that shows the location of where that is occurring to then be able to see what particular networks are impacting or being impacted by those energy waves that are too fast or too slow. Have I
That's
got
pretty
that?
accurate. Yep, it's pretty good. Yep.
Cool.
Okay. Yep. Uh, um, and the advantage of, I mean, I'm a bit biased, Carly, but the advantage of imaging the electrics like this is that we can see them, and then we can
Mm.
target the electrics quite specifically with therapies like neurofeedback that maybe we'll talk about perhaps another time or something.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
But it's a really accurate look inside and see. Okay.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, let's have a look at a couple other examples. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Cool. Okay, so this is a totally common sort of ADHD kind of thing. Okay, so we're looking at the Loretta here. Okay,
Mhm.
what we're seeing here is increases in because it's red, but we're actually looking at slow frequencies. This person has got too much slow activity in these prefrontal areas on both sides. Okay,
Yes.
and that will directly knock out task positive networks for attention and executive function. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Let's not forget that people can have more than one thing going on.
Mm.
Okay. Um, you see a lot of this one. Okay. So here we're seeing too much of because it's red and we're looking at faster frequencies. This person has got too much fast activity in these sort of front middle parts of the brain around in here. Okay. That's basically kind of in here, Carly.
Mhm.
And what are the major networks there? Okay, where we think about the salience network responsible for sort of flexibility in thinking. Okay, tendency to hyper focus and to get stuck on things, find it difficult to let things go, very OCD and PDA kind of
Mhm.
stuff. Okay,
Mhm.
we think about the limbic network responsible for regulating how we respond to stress, like to have exaggerated stress responses. Okay, yeah. And we also think about the default mode network too, which is also has a hub at the front, if you recall. Okay,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Default mode network, what are you thinking about? Overactivity, too many thoughts. So this person's going to have a really busy mind that gets stuck on things all the time, find it difficult shifting gears.
This is my Mr. 9.
um, uh, this is a particularly difficult pattern. Okay.
Mm.
So here we have overactivity localized to the temporal lobes on both sides.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. This impacts the limbic networks for
Mm.
regulating our emotions and feelings and how we respond to stress. And again, the salience network. So not default network like that one at the front, okay,
Mm.
but just limbic and salient. So
Mm.
inflexible, very black and white, difficulty regulating emotions, but a lot of that. So problems with the temporal lobes result in usually a lot of difficulty regulating emotions. Things typically very kind of mad, bad, sad, angry, irritable, up and downy, walking on eggshells, exploding around you kind of
Mm.
pattern. Okay,
Mm.
very difficult to manage that one. Okay, yeah. Not difficult to treat, it's difficult to manage. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, uh, um, Last common example here, okay, is again the temporal lobes, but notice we're looking on the insides of them now. Okay, yeah.
Mm.
So looking down from the top, Carly, that's the front and that's the back. Temporal lobes, the side of the head, but notice these areas on the inside. Okay,
Mm.
so I always do this kind of demo in there. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Um, uh, um, and again, those areas are associated with. Oops, so 2 seconds. Where is it? Those areas are associated with the limbic network and the salience network, okay, but
Mm.
also the medial temporal network involved with memory and learning. Okay, those are the people with a sort of memory learning block kind of things going on.
Yes.
We'll actually also see patterns like that most commonly in things like PTSD and trauma too. Okay, there's typically a real sort of deep kind of shutdown kind of thing process going on inside the brain.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
Those medial temporal areas contain structures like the amygdala, you guys will know about, I'm sure, but also the insular cortex, which is involved with interoception, internal sensory processing. So
Mhm. Mhm.
people can often become overly sensitive to how their body feels, or sometimes they become less sensitive to and disassociate and disconnect from their sense of physical
That
self.
is my Mr. 9. You disassociate with interoception. Yep.
All right. Okay, yeah. That part of my brain is involved with like a sense of general kind of well-being and confidence, not feeling that things aren't okay, something bad is going to happen in a second. Um, a general feeling that things aren't right, and it's like a dis-ease, unease kind of thing. You have
Mm.
funny tummies and body physical complaints with that kind of thing. Yep.
Mm. Yep.
Um, so those are probably some of the sort of most common examples I see, and say really common to see more than one thing going on. Okay,
Yes.
Uh, um,
Yep.
um, and you know, we won't see one pattern always with one thing. That's not how it
Mm.
works. But so you'll
Mm.
always see the same patterns in people with problems with interoception, okay, or problems with inflexible thinking, or
Yes.
being overwhelmed by the world around them, and all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Mm.
Um, I'll stop talking because I'll go on and hand it back to you, Carly.
Well, I'm actually there. So I was just wondering from a clinical process, and I'm thinking about this as I often do when I'm chatting on the podcast because it's the thing that comes to mind the most easily. So if you've got a child coming in, and if I think about my evenings, I often feel like a pharmacist with the medications that my children take to help them manage their time in the world. If you were going to do a scan, does the medication they take
it,
impact what you're
it,
going to see?
yeah, it can do. Okay.
Mm,
Uh, um, and as long as we know what medications people are taking and when,
mm,
okay, we can take that into account when we're doing the analysis. Also recognizing that it can get particularly complicated when people are taking, polypharmacy and quite a lot of different things. A lot of the kids we
mm,
see are quite a long list of different things and
mm.
medication to speed them up, another one to slow them down at the end of the day, and so forth. So,
Yeah.
um, uh, as long as we know what people are taking, okay, that's really helpful.
Mm,
Sometimes parents will choose to not give their children medication on the day of the scan to get a true accurate baseline. Um, we can't advise patients to do that, okay? But if that's what they chose to do, then that can give us some helpful information.
and there's only certain medications really that you've got that level of flexibility with as well,
Correct. Not many
if
you can do that with.
yeah, like Ritalin?
Yeah.
No worries, that's
Yep.
fine.
That's right.
Anxiety medication or
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
else
Yeah.
where it might be a little bit more
Yep.
complicated.
And
Yeah.
many of the children and adults that we see are on prescription meds, often more than one.
Mm,
Uh, um, and they're probably coming to see us because they're not working well enough or they want to get off them. Okay. Yeah.
mm. Yep.
That's a really common kind of group. Um, uh, um, when I when I meet with patients, you just imagine perhaps we've done our initial consult, we've done a scan, we've explained the results to people. Okay, this is what's going on inside your head.
Mm,
Then I'll also then say, okay, what can you do about this? And in fact, what things can you do that can change how your brain works, for which is
yes.
evidence for, so
Yeah.
you don't waste your time and your money. Recognize that nothing is bulletproof. Everything has got pluses and minuses. Combination approaches work well.
Mm,
Different people are going to tell you different things, and it's entirely up to you what you want to do. Okay. Yeah?
yes.
I
Yep.
point out that I have a responsibility to at least point out what all your options are to help you make an informed choice. Okay.
Mm,
And basically, people are typically looking at things like pharmaceuticals, talk
mhm.
based therapies, skill based training like behavioral therapy, speech and OT, positive lifestyle change, and brain based therapies. Pretty
Yep.
much everybody we see has done all this stuff before, often for years, or maybe they're looking to avoid doing them for some reason, or maybe
Mm,
they're doing them a bit and it's helping a bit, but not quite enough. Okay, it's pretty
mm,
much
mm,
everybody. Okay, yeah.
mm,
So it makes sense for us to do the different kind of stuff. So we focus on brain therapies.
mm.
Okay. It's common for people to be doing more than one thing, and I think a combination can work really well. Okay. So we're not going to tell people to stop doing something, if they think it's helping. Okay. Yeah. Um, Although, many parents that we see will say, look, we've been doing speech and OT for, I don't know, 3 years or something.
Mm.
Okay. And we not really doing anything. Okay. That's
Yeah. Yep.
quite common. And I think, well,
Yeah.
goodness, don't think I could treat somebody for 3 years and not get results and continue care. Okay. Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, but maybe people don't know what else they can do.
mhm,
Okay. But there are
mm,
there are other options. That's the really, really cool thing. Okay. Uh, um, and getting a scan done so you know what you're looking at, I think is first step. Okay. We're certainly always very happy to share those exam findings with people's other therapists. Okay. Yeah.
mm,
Um, but there's the information from scans is particularly helpful. Okay, when you're working in a clinic like this, where you can work directly with the information and train those networks and train those brain waves, and that's what we can do. Um,
I'm thinking about how do I put this in the most appropriate way? So, every parent of a neurodivergent child, and I'm sure you've seen it in the clinic, is always trying to do the best for their child to make the child feel the best that they can be.
yep.
And it really is a such an expanding field of knowledge. We're still constantly learning about what helps, about symptomology, about what's possibly, and I'm not even going down the tunnel of what may be causing things, because that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a really scary place to go. But, all of that is constantly being explored and researched, and information is coming out. Some of it accurate, as we know, some of it inaccurate. Um, and it's such a minefield for parents to be in, going, what do I do? What is best?
Mm, mm, mm.
How do I get the right balance of intervention for my child? How do I make sure I provide enough, but I'm also not providing too much, because it is also very possible to over therapize your child so
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they're
yeah. And that's particularly, I say it all the time, particularly with this low alpha subtype, okay, which you see a
mm,
lot of. These children are very easily overwhelmed all the time. They're super sensitive to the world around them. That they will pick up on that sort of slightly unpleasant kind of Christmas vibe that starts to build up. That they're super
mm,
sensitive, aren't they? Okay, and
mm.
um, and always telling people you can do too much for a good thing. Okay, you
Yeah,
could theoretically be
yeah.
doing, two speech, two OT, two neurofeedback, gymnastics and swimming and things. And whilst each individual activity has lots of merit, all at the same time, for a little kid with a small battery pack that's really sensitive, and you've got
Mm.
meltdown material, okay, which is
Yes,
not a which is not a side effect of a particular therapy. It's just there's too much going on.
that's
Okay.
it. That's
Um,
it.
and I'll certainly suggest to parents that sometimes you might want to pause some other things if you want to, so there's not so much on your child's plate. And most
Mm.
parents don't mind doing that at all, because usually they've been doing other things for years and they're not really sure if it's doing anything anyway.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and, any parent is stretching themselves thin for a child, and any
Mhm.
new parent of a neurodivergent child is stretching themselves even thinner.
Yeah.
So, any opportunity to pare things back so that they get authentic time with their child is a
And
good thing.
I think something else that's really worth mentioning, Carly, is that um, unless your child can self-regulate, okay,
Mm,
they're not going to get the best out of more traditional one-to-one skill-based training. You can see the
mm,
world's best at OT, but if your child can't self-regulate and work with them, it's a bit pointless. Okay, yeah?
mhm, mhm,
Um, what some of these therapies in clinic are particularly good at doing is improving self-regulation. So remember, we're talking about improving attention, executive function, and emotional self-regulation. Okay,
mm.
yeah? And if you can do some work to improve someone's ability to regulate, they can then return to some skill-based training, get lots more out of it than before.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, as we've, and this is oversimplifying considering the conversation we're having. But as we've talked about before, two things: being regulated doesn't necessarily mean being calm. It's being in the appropriate state for the activity that
Absolutely.
you're
Yeah, yeah. You
performing.
need to run from tigers sometimes, but also fall asleep easily too, don't you?
That
Yeah.
is exactly right. So parents who feel bad that they can't constantly keep their children calm, you're not meant to. Um, And, as we've often discussed as well, the higher up the stress continuum you are, the further you are away from being able to access the cortex, access your executive
Mm,
functioning.
mm.
So the more that we can get our children into those appropriate states, and what you're saying is the more they can actually open up and accept what's being taught to them.
Yeah, exactly
Um,
that. Yeah, you can't possibly learn anything if you're mega stressed out. It's pretty simple.
yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, um, I would love to have a deep dive into to neurofeedback in another episode.
Yeah, cool.
Is there a way to give us like a 30-second elevator pitch of what neurofeedback therapy is?
Yep. So neurofeedback is. I've got to try not to sound like a robot, Carl, because I said this so many times. So,
Yeah.
neurofeedback is targeted brain training. It's been around
Mhm,
since about the 1950s, 60s. Best known these days as a drug-free treatment for ADHD, where people are often but not always trained to speed up slow areas at the front of the brain that are often but not always running a bit slow in
mhm,
ADHD.
mhm.
Um, uh, but everybody is different, of course, and you can use the results of QEEG to understand what's going on and where, and target and train any part of the brain, whether it's here or here or here or here. Okay, so it's not a one size fits all approach for everybody with a diagnosis of X or Y, Z. Okay, people's training should be targeted. You know? What exactly is it? Okay, that's a really cool question. It's hard to describe. Okay, so neurofeedback is classified as a behavioral therapy where feedback is used to change behavior using a process of basically learning. So it's no different in principle to perhaps better known behavioral therapies like speech and OT, but not trained like a of speech sound or a pencil grip, you're training brain waves and brain networks instead. But
Okay.
the same principles of learning apply. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah? I could go on. Shall I go on or shall I stop now?
If you would like to, I'm sure I've got lots of parents who are sitting here
Let
going,
me,
I
let me,
don't know what this, and I would
let me
love
just
to
do
know what it
like
is.
2 minutes. 2 minutes. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Uh,
Let's do it.
the the example on the website video is all about puppy training. Okay, that's quite an old video now. And the example I use these days is teaching my daughter to drive. Same kind of idea. So I can hop in the car with my daughter and off we go practice driving for a bit. Yeah, every second she's doing a bit better, I can see that and give her some praise and vice versa. There's a pretty good bet that that feedback based on my observation of her performance change patterns of activity in her brain, what she's doing,
Mm,
particularly if I stick to a few kind of basic rules. So it's best if I reward more than I punish, if I give the
mhm,
feedback in real time, if I'm consistent and repetitive and do it a lot, at some point you can stop and you're done. It's how we learn most things. Again, you can train your brain in the same way it's neurofeedback. So, for example, let's take that low alpha one at the back, for example. So we can pop some wires on the back of the head over the parts of the brain that we want to train, like a mini version of the scan with less mess, and measure somebody's EEG in real time. Okay. Every second things are going a bit better. So, for example, more of the alpha activity in that location, we can detect that change in their brain in real time, give them a little reward, and vice versa. And their brain will start to change a little bit whilst they're training. And then with repetition, it will start to build and to stick.
mhm.
You're shaping EEG as opposed to shaping a pencil grip. The same principles.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay.
The feedback with neurofeedback is sound and vision.
Mhm,
It used to be desperately dull when I first started when computers were pretty slow. Now it's kind of fun and people can train watching videos and movies to make it sort of entertaining, kind of. So you've got somebody sitting down, okay, a few wires stuck on their head, okay, measuring their EEG. They could be watching, Bluey or Spider-Man or Top Gear, doesn't matter what people are watching, okay. Every second things are going a bit better. So in that example, more alpha wave activity in that location. We can detect that change in their EEG in real time, give them
mm,
a little reward, and the video that they're watching gets a bit easier to see and to hear, and vice versa. So things will fade in and out in real time, and their
mhm,
brain will start to change in real time in response to that feedback. They're not going to feel anything because they're just learning. Okay, yeah. And it's not something you can consciously control. So instructions are just watch the movie, let your brain figure out the pattern. So the experience is they're watching, cartoon or video fade in and out. Okay. Yeah.
mm,
Um, not a lot happens to start with. It's like all learning things. Okay. So it's a little
mhm,
bit by bit. Okay. Yeah.
mhm.
But usually, with repetitive sessions over several weeks plus, talk about that another time, you start to get changes that persist and last. Okay. So,
Mm.
um, that's like a super quick overview. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. That's a good 101 for us to get a bite of what we're talking about.
Cool.
Um,
Cool.
I also, if you don't mind, I want to ask, it's a personal question. And there will be others who are listening who might take this interest as well. So we've looked at things like ADHD, OCD, PDA, some of the patterns that can be common with behaviors connected with that. I'm really interested on a FASD brain
Mm,
and if
mm.
there are any particular common occurrences around the FASD
No, so
brain.
generally with that kind of thing, you'll tend to see um, uh, um, more of a global change in brain function, more associated with a general developmental lag and delay. Okay, yeah,
Mhm.
which can look a bit like that low alpha profile too.
Okay.
Okay, sometimes you might see other areas take a bigger hit. Okay, depends on the case and stuff, but you're generally more looking at a generalized global kind of impact.
Okay, that's really interesting. I've got to varying degrees. All three of my adopted kidlets have FASD, so it's just intriguing to me.
Yeah.
So,
They're they're probably going to, if we did a scan, they'd probably look a lot like that kind of low alpha subtype, probably without knowing much about them, Carly. Yeah.
okay. And are
This
you
is not advice, okay? Yeah. But that low alpha subtype often responds particularly well to a product called L-theanine, which I'm sure some of your listeners have come across. L-theanine is an amino acid that has been shown to increase alpha wave activity. Okay.
okay?
Now, not telling anyone to take that, okay, yeah, But if I did a scan and we saw this low alpha pattern, okay, specifically that pattern, okay, we'll go, this person's going to respond well to L-theanine, okay, for example. So you can use lots of imaging to kind of be more specific in your sort of supplementary nutritional advice as well.
Yeah, and look, it's an expanding world. I think that parents of neurodivergent children are really starting to understand now. And we've had a dietitian on before, but I think we want to deep dive into some of those things a little bit
Oh,
more.
cool.
Um, because learning about the MFM. Very careful how I say this.
EFR.
Dean,
It's nearly as bad as neuroplasticity, isn't it?
my brain wants to call it something else. And the impacts of B vitamins and magnesiums and omega 3s and all the different things that can help the brain work. So
And
um,
can you see, can't you, how how all that stuff has merit? Okay, but what's important, I think people are starting to get the idea of, is that you need to personalize this
mm,
kind of stuff. Okay,
yes.
you want to be using some kind of biomarkers, don't you? So we can use QEG as a biomarker for this kind of stuff, but there are other biomarkers you can use to help guide other therapies and pills and potions, can't you? So
Hmm.
much better
Hmm.
to look for biomarker and say, okay, well, this person, for example, with or without a label of autism, has this kind of biomarker, and we know will respond to, L-theanine or whatever it is. Okay, so
Mm.
I think that's something I would really keen to follow more of, is the expansion of biomarkers to predict therapies. So there's less of the trial and error kind of approach. Yeah.
That's it. Rather than just throwing
Yeah,
everything
you
at
can, you
it
can
and
have
being like,
you can do buckets of supplements, can't you? Yeah.
yeah. And once again, it comes back to, our kids are experiencing everything that we're trying on them to see what works. And if we can kind of hone that down for them and be more precise,
Mm,
it's only a good thing for them. It's only going to be positive.
mm.
I mean, I can say I tried so my two boys tried equine therapy,
Oh,
and
okay.
for one of them, he did equine therapy, but it was actually less horse involved. It was more farm activity involved. And the farm activity, it was beautiful for him. It was absolutely fantastic. For the other one, absolutely no impact or benefit whatsoever. We also found out he's scared of horses.
Okay.
Um, and then you sit back and you go, well, should I try art therapy or should I try music therapy?
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
like it's a huge long road that you can
Mm,
go
mm,
down.
mm.
Um,
Well, a
and
good a good a good biomarker for equine therapy should at least be, are you scared of horses? That'd be a good starting question, wouldn't it?
I would completely agree. Are you scared of horses? Are you highly allergic to being outdoors?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
They're probably both good things to think about
I
beforehand.
often, interestingly, I mean, uh, so these, we've talked about patterns that are associated with, cognitive inflexibility, haven't we? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Um, and I'll often say that activities that promote flexibility obviously kind of would be helpful for that pattern, and typically things like ball sports, racket sports, interact with nature animals help to promote flexible thinking. Okay, because all those
Mm,
things are unpredictable, aren't they? But
yes.
but we know that if what happens is massively different to our expectations, we can have a big problem. Okay,
Hmm.
but if it's just a little bit different, we can overcome that. Then we start to build helpful plasticity in that system, can't we? Okay, yeah. So um, uh, often and I'm often recommending activities and all that kind of stuff in particular ways, because it ticks lots of other boxes too in terms of brain function and stuff too. But um, and often activities, often solo sports and that kind of stuff, where you often rehearse the same thing over and over and over again to get it just right. Okay,
Mm,
um,
mm,
often doesn't help that kind of pattern, uh,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
can make it
Well, that
worse.
would be rigid, wouldn't it?
Be
Yeah.
very not so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. We are definitely going to have a proper neurofeedback session. This has been such an interesting conversation. Um, I highly encourage our parents to go and have a look. If you've been listening to the podcast rather than watching, firstly, we're on YouTube, so go and watch it. You can see it. You can see us chatting and pointing to the pictures. Otherwise, definitely make sure you go and have a look at the show notes so that you can see these images. They really do help bring it to life. And I'm so grateful, Daniel, that you took the time to be able to share those with us.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for explaining this. It's just, it's so fantastic to have a new perspective on the things that are available for our children and helping us to understand them better. And I'm really, really grateful for your time.
It's been lots of fun, Carly. Absolutely. Hope to talk to you again.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Be sure to check the show notes on our website for any links and references. You can find us at youcangrowyourownway.podbean.com. And if you found this episode helpful, we would love you to help us get the word out. You can share the podcast, tell a friend, and be sure to click the follow or subscribe button so you can access all our new episodes. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, where we would love to connect with you. You Can Grow Your Own Way recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of this place, now known as Australia. We're coming to you from Jabberung, Jawajali and Wadawurrung country, the country of our guest speaker, and from wherever you are listening. We respect the elders of the past and present, and we share our friendship and kindness.